And now, a dramatic reading from Anthony Berry.
Hi! I'm going to give you a little bit more information before I just go right into the dramatic reading. I want you to know that this is sort of the culmination of several incidents. And if you'd like to know the history of those incidents before coming to this, which you should, because otherwise you'll just sort of be in the middle without any understanding what's going on, you can find the history of these incidents leading up to this event in our Superfly podcast, available at panelsonpages.com, also findable on iTunes. So yesterday, we received an email from Peter Katz of Wizard World. I apologize if you can hear the cough drop rattling around my mouth. It's better than the coughing, which I'm probably going to do otherwise. So, Peter Katz writes, "Hey Anthony, hope all is well. Just wanted to touch base on the Mid-OhioCon this weekend. We have a few booths left, and I wanted to see if you're interested, as we have lower prices on these remaining booths. Please let me know if you're interested. Thanks! Peter Katz, Vice President, Business Affairs and Development, Wizard World Incorporated." I'm not going to read the address or the phone number because I want to leave this guy some propriety. To this email, I felt that I had no option but to write this response. To all concerned parties. I'm not exactly certain why it is that you would feel the need to touch base here. I feel at this juncture that we've been more than clear regarding our position on Mid-OhioCon 11. On August 25th, I personally responded to an email from this email address being Peter Katz, parenthetical. I mention this only to point out that it is now clear that my original response was either ignored or ignored with malice aforethought, and parenthetical. In my response to that previous digital interrogative regarding our presence at Mid-OhioCon this year, I wrote, quote, "I'm afraid that the harsh reality is that the price of tables have gone from last year's affordable to a current unreasonable. We simply cannot afford to do the show this year, and quite honestly, we are a little miffed at Wizard for pushing us out of an otherwise inaccessible show." From an otherwise accessible show, not unaccessible. End quote. I use an exact quote from that previous email, as it has become apparent that my intent was not understood. I fear that I must also reword and explain myself so that there is no possible error in communication. After that original response was sent, and I might add that this is also in addition to our voiced extreme displeasure regarding the price hikes to the Wizard representative who initially informed us of the takeover at last year's show, we've received in the past 2 weeks no fewer than 3 phone calls from Wizard requesting our presence at this year's show. During the first call, this store's manager was reached. It is my understanding that although he was fairly respectfully firm regarding our store's intent not to attend Mid-OhioCon 11, the conversation for some reason lasted well over 20 minutes, during which time he was A, pestered to explain why the store had chosen not to attend, B, lied to very directly about the size of this show, parenthetical. It was apparently intimated that this show was going to be as big as New York Comic Con, a statistical impossibility, end parenthetical, and C, eventually forced to cut the conversation off on the basis that the store was about to open and the caller showed no signs of relenting. The next day, I received a call from the same person, whose name I unfortunately neglected to write down. For that, I apologize. This call was not particularly pleasant. I described in detail that Wizard's acquisition of Mid-OhioCon had created a number of problems for us, not the least of which being that the prices had skyrocketed. Going back to last year's show, when we were originally approached about Wizard taking over this show, the representative mentioned that the prices were still in flux and that they would most likely go down to a more competitive rate. This was not the case at all. Last year, we paid $450 for a corner booth. This year, Wizard expects us to pay $700 for an inline table at the same show. The caller responded to this by saying something to the effect of, well, last year's show was run by a different group, We're Wizard, and we run our shows a little bit differently. To this, I responded that, yes, I've worked Wizard shows in the past, and that I do in fact know how Wizard runs their shows, and that frankly, I was not impressed enough to justify doubling our costs. He then said that Adam West and Billy D. Williams would be there, to which I responded that I've seen zero evidence that the presence of those gentlemen will double my sales, which is obviously what I'm going to need to see in order to feel that this is a safe risk. Let me scroll down for a minute, this is a long one. Now, to be fair, the caller did offer to negotiate prices somewhat. He asked what price level I'd be comfortable with in order for us to come to the show. I told him that given the layout of the situation, if the store was going to attend this show, then I needed to see pricing remotely comparable to last year's pricing. Because until I see some hard attendance numbers, as the risk taker in this situation, I'm forced to assume that this show will be the same size or smaller than last year's. Obviously, I don't truly believe that this will be the exact case, but the fact of the matter is, until I see evidence, the safe and conservative stance is to follow the historical evidence. The historical evidence tells me that I can't really plan on making much more than $1,000 at this show. The lowest the Wizard representative was willing to negotiate was $500 for an inline table. This is, of course, $50 up from last year with a downgrade in space. Now, as a moderately seasoned convention vendor, I've experienced that if we're only buying one table at a show, it must be a corner booth. It is the only way that we can get the face-out space we need. If we need to go inline, then we need to buy 2 tables or more, and that is simply out of the question given our current financial situation. The caller offered the section wherein we cannot place signage or sell any high-ticket items. We declined that section because I honestly find the notion of being placed in that section silly. To further complicate the matter, I also told the caller that we've already got an event scheduled for this weekend, the 3rd annual Yellow Spring Zombie Walk. This thusly painted a rather unpretty picture. A convention at non-optimal price, a table in a non-optimal location, all on a non-optimal weekend. At this juncture, the caller and I agreed that there was not much more to discuss, as I'd given a rather strong litany of reasons why we weren't planning on attending. At this point in the game, I was feeling rather frustrated with the situation, as it actually really pains me to not go to a convention this close to our shop. I honestly feel that any convention that we could attend, but we do not attend, is absolutely a missed opportunity for our store. But I even more strongly feel that if going to a convention is going to be more costly than gainly, it would then be foolhardy to attend. Having the belief that I had successfully communicated this, I felt comfortable letting the matter drop. However, this past week, the caller called back again. He indicated that he was willing to negotiate a lower price point. I told him that at this juncture, less than 2 weeks before the show, there simply wasn't a feasible way for us to plan the show. Had he been willing to negotiate a price to the price point that I felt comfortable with at the previous week, I perhaps could have been swayed. Since at that point, I'd have had enough time to rearrange people's schedules and actually put together the nuts and bolts of the show in addition to our previously planned zombie walk. He then interjected, copping a rather more aggressive attitude, asking, "Well, what's the problem? Is it a staffing issue?" He was going to ask more questions, but I'd had enough. It is, quite frankly, none of Wizard's business why I choose not to go to this show. We'd been fairly clear on multiple occasions, and honestly didn't feel like having the same conversation yet again. Adding to that a sense of being bullied into this show less than 2 weeks before, when I'd already been very explicit regarding it being wildly outside of my price range, did nothing to encourage me. I interrupted him and told him flat out that at this point, the biggest single reason that we were saying no was because he didn't know how to take no for an answer. I then said in no hesitant tones, "We will not be attending Mid-Ohio Con this year. period. And then I hung up. At that point, while now extremely frustrated with the situation, I considered the case finally closed. It must be after an interaction like that, yes? Apparently not. So here I see now an email from this email address indicating that there are now lower prices. I find this fascinating. A, because as discussed above, I've been fairly clear regarding my stance. And B, because of the exact quote from this very email address delivered on 8/25, quote, "Also please note that because there are very few booths left, we'll be raising the retailer rates on August 26th, 2011 by an additional $150, so it is critical that you get your registration forms in ASAP," end quote. This concerns me. Towards the end of August, we received an email saying prices were about to go up. Again. Then, 2 weeks before the show, we start receiving what I can only describe as panicked emails and phone calls talking about slashing prices. I'm given the impression that Wizard is now desperate to move these booth spaces, thus giving me the feeling that Wizard had not sold remotely as many booth spaces as expected. This is reinforced by the fact that 3 days ago, I could not yet find a vendors list on the Mid-Ohio-Con website. I am left with the feeling that this show will not be well attended, at least by vendors, which in turn leaves me wondering even more if attendance at this year's show would be wise. The unwavering answer I keep coming back to is no. And here we get to the principle of the matter. Since it was announced that Wizard had acquired this show, it has seemed that Wizard has touted about how much the Wizard branding is going to blow this con off the map. There has been so much confidence here that I fear Wizard has completely failed to address the concerns of the people who are expected to drop money on financing this show. Wizard keeps approaching me as if the Wizard branding sells itself, and as if I am a complete fool for not noticing. When I bring up my concerns, I feel, parenthetical, quite legitimately at this point, since I'm still writing this in parenthetical, that these concerns have been completely ignored. This is not the behavior I expect of a company who expects me to give them money for any reason. I'm quite certain that I'm not the only person who feels this way. Anecdotally, it is my understanding that Tony Moore denounced future attendance at Mid-Ohio-Con the day the announcement was made. Further anecdotally, it is my understanding that at least one artist has been asked by Wizard to, quote, "only say positive things about Wizard shows," end quote, which is behavior I personally find abominable. My frustrations are further aggravated in that I now feel that Mid-Ohio-Con had previously been a show that this store could attend, and it quite honestly now feels out of reach. It was a show that we were just beginning to become comfortable with. A show with a distinct personality, and honestly one that offered a bit of variety from the typical Wizard experience. But then Wizard bought the show and took that from me. I see this as a step towards the homogenization of the Comic-Con circuit, which I in turn believe to be anemic towards the industry as a whole. This industry needs more diversity, more people working towards a brighter whole, more small groups working in communion towards a more diverse universal acceptance. But instead of that, what I'm seeing is an act of corporate expansionism, an unwillingness on Wizard's part to trailblaze new frontiers, but to instead co-opt the established work of others, enact outrageous price hikes, and rebrand as if the Wizard name makes it all okay. This is the kind of tactic I expect to see from Walmart, and is also precisely the kind of tactic that I find to be anathema to this industry as a whole. To have these kind of thoughts regarding this show, and to then be approached by Wizard repeatedly with the confident swagger of, "We're Wizard, of course you want to go to our show, why wouldn't you, what kind of fool are you?" is saddening at best and outrageous at worst. In conclusion, while I do apologize for the tone of this email, I've come to the conclusion that a rant of this level is the only way that I can make my position clear. Superfly will most definitely not be in attendance this year. Further, the persistence we've come against in this decision is offensive beyond acceptable limits. Truth be told, I'm considerably upset that I find myself in the position to feel that writing a message like this is my only option. We are very close to an outright refusal to attend any Wizard shows ever, if this is the continued attitude Wizard expects to take up with its intended customer base. We shall pay close attention to the attendance numbers this year. If it turns out that we are incorrect in our initial assumptions, then I'll gladly apologize for my doubts. I will expect an apology either way, however, for the unwelcome persistence Wizard has displayed in its undaunting efforts to bully us into what I'm forced to assume by the facts of the matter what would be a waste of time and money. Assuming this missive does not place us on some "fuck these guys" list, I will be willing to consider next year, but only after the numbers are in, and assuming that this particular no is finally understood and accepted for what it is. As always, I appreciate your time, as I hope you appreciate the time I've taken to explain myself here. Best, Anthony K. Berry, owner, Superfly Comics and Games.
Insert air horns and gunshots, because shots just got fired. It's been a dramatic reading. Thanks for watching, everybody.